A quiet grandmother hides in the embroidery of a lunchbox the love she was forbidden to show. In front of the entire school, she is humiliated by her daughter-in-law, unaware that an attentive teacher has just witnessed an unspoken cry. From that moment on, notes, drawings, and silences weave an invisible alliance that defies control and fear. But it is the voice of a child in a packed auditorium that breaks the silence and restores love's right to exist. The morning dawned slowly over the Primrose Hill neighborhood in London, bringing with it that characteristic smell of fresh coffee and warm bread escaping from the local bakeries. Mrs. Helen Thompson woke before her alarm clock, as she always had in recent months. The silence of the large house seemed to swallow her whole, echoing memories she preferred to keep hidden in some dark corner of her soul. She rose from bed with her usual discipline, meticulously tidied the sheets, and walked to the kitchen, where she prepared her coffee with milk and 2 buttered toasts. Sitting at the kitchen table, she watched the quiet movement of the tree-lined street through the window. Some housekeepers were already hurrying towards the apartments where they worked, while doormen swept the pavements in front of the elegant buildings. Helen held the coffee cup with both hands, feeling the comforting warmth of the porcelain against her skin. Her eyes, however, were distant, fixed on something only she could see. 8 months ago, her life had completely changed. Her only son, Raphael Thompson, a successful businessman who ran a chain of car dealerships, had passed away unexpectedly after a traffic accident on the Thames embankment. Since then, Helen found herself estranged from her greatest treasure, the one who kept Raphael's memory alive. Her grandson Gabriel, a boy of just 7, with deep brown eyes and a shy smile that used to light up her days. The person responsible for this estrangement was Patricia Morrison, Raphael's widow, a woman Helen had met years ago when her son first brought her home for dinner. She remembered that night perfectly. Patricia arrived wearing an impeccable navy blue dress, perfectly brushed blonde hair falling over her shoulders, speaking with that soft, controlled voice that Helen would soon learn to distrust. From the beginning, something about that woman bothered her, but Raphael seemed enchanted, and Helen was never one to interfere in her son's choices. In the first few years, their coexistence was tolerable. Patricia maintained appearances, allowed Helen to visit her grandson on Sundays, accepted the gifts and the lunchboxes filled with love that the grandmother prepared. But everything changed after that fateful day when Raphael didn't come home. Patricia, who had always been controlling, became even more possessive and distant, claiming that Gabriel needed emotional stability and that Helen's presence made him too sad. She began to limit visits, then cancel them, until she simply forbade all contact. Helen tried to talk, to argue, to plead, but Patricia had influence, money, and lawyers. She also had an impressive ability to manipulate situations to her advantage, always portraying herself as a misunderstood victim, a zealous mother merely protecting her son from a cruel world. And poor Gabriel was caught in the middle of that power play, silent and increasingly withdrawn. On that particular Thursday morning, Helen made a decision. She packed a pink lunchbox with embroidered details into a bag. Inside it, a ham and cheese sandwich, fresh orange, juice and homemade chocolate chip cookies. She knew Gabriel loved those cookies. He used to ask her to make them whenever he visited, before everything fell apart. Helen looked at the wall clock. 7:15 in the morning. If she left now, she would arrive at St. Cecilia's Academy exactly when the Year 1 students were entering. The academy was only 4 blocks from her house, a classic 1950s building with an exposed brick facade and an imposing green gate. Helen walked slowly, feeling her heart quicken with each step. She wasn't sure if this was sensible, but she also couldn't bear the distance from her grandson any longer. She needed to see him, even if from afar, even if only for a few seconds. She needed him to know he wasn't alone, that she was still there, waiting. When she arrived at the academy gate, there was already a small group of parents accompanying their children to the entrance. Some chatted animatedly among themselves, others looked at their phones while children ran around. Helen stood a little apart, leaning against a tree, watching each child who passed. And then she saw him. Gabriel got out of a luxurious black car, accompanied by Patricia. The boy wore the school uniform, navy blue trousers and a white shirt, his heavy backpack on his back. His face was serious, expressionless, so different from the cheerful boy Helen had known. Patricia, beside him, impeccable as always, held her son's hand firmly, walking towards the gate with determined steps. Helen felt her legs tremble. For an instant she thought of giving up, going home and putting that lunchbox deep in the cupboard. But then Gabriel looked in her direction. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and Helen saw something that made her move before she even thought. It was recognition, it was longing, it was a silent plea for help. She advanced between the parents and children, the lunchbox in her hands, her heart pounding. Patricia hadn't seen her yet. Gabriel stopped walking, making his mother stop too. That's when Patricia followed her son's gaze and finally noticed Helen's presence. Patricia's expression changed instantly. The polite smile she maintained for other parents vanished, replaced by a mask of calculated coldness. She pulled Gabriel closer to her, as if protecting the boy from imminent danger. Helen approached, extending the lunchbox with trembling hands. "I prepared Gabriel's favorite snack," she said, her voice weaker than she would have liked. "I thought he might enjoy something made with care." Patricia looked at the lunchbox, as if it were contaminated. Several parents around began to pay attention to the scene, the buzz of conversations gradually dying down. A young teacher, who was organizing the line of students near the gate, also turned her face towards them. "Mrs. Helen," Patricia began, her voice low but sharp as a blade, "we've talked about this. Gabriel doesn't need your interference. He has everything he needs at home. You are embarrassing everyone here, including my son." Helen looked at Gabriel, who kept his eyes fixed on the ground, his shoulders tense. She wanted to hug him, run her hand through his hair, tell him it was all right, that she was there. But Patricia formed an insurmountable barrier between them. "I just want my grandson to know that I love him," Helen insisted, her voice choked. "That he's not alone." Patricia took a step forward, bringing her face close to Helen's. Her expensive perfume filled the air between them, but what really stood out were the words that came from her lips, low enough for only Helen and a few people nearby to hear. "You are a pathetic woman, a desperate old woman trying to cling to a past that no longer exists. Gabriel is my son, and I decide who is part of his life, and you are not. So I suggest you take your ridiculous little lunchbox and go back to your empty house. Don't show up here again. Next time, I'll call security." The words fell upon Helen like heavy stones. She felt her face burn with humiliation, tears threatening to escape. Around her, some parents looked away, embarrassed. Others whispered among themselves. The young teacher, a woman with brown hair tied in a ponytail, watched everything with a worried expression. Helen looked once more at Gabriel, whose eyes were now watery, but who remained silent, as if he had been trained not to react. Patricia pulled the boy by the arm and walked towards the school gate, without looking back. Gabriel turned his face one last time, and Helen saw a tear roll down his cheek before he disappeared inside the building. Helen stood there holding the lunchbox while the last parents and students entered the school. The young teacher was still at the gate organizing papers, but her eyes constantly returned to Helen. There was something in that gaze, an understanding that went beyond mere curiosity. It was as if she also knew what it meant to be separated from someone you love. Finally, Helen turned and began to walk back home. The sun was already higher, the day promised to be warm. But inside her, there was only cold, a cold that penetrated her bones and seemed never to leave. When she arrived home, she placed the lunchbox on the kitchen table and sat in the same chair as before. She stayed there for hours, motionless, looking at that object that represented everything she still had to give: love. It was late when Helen finally got up. She went to Raphael's room, the one she had kept untouched since he was a teenager. The walls still had posters of old bands. The bookshelf was full of books and football trophies. Helen opened the closet, looking for something she didn't even know what it was, and it was then, among old shirts and photo albums, that she found it. It was an envelope yellowed by time, kept between the pages of an old notebook Raphael used for work notes. Helen immediately recognized her son's handwriting on the front of the envelope. It was addressed to her, but had never been delivered, With trembling hands, she opened the envelope and took out the sheets of paper, sitting on Raphael's bed to read. The letter was long, written in Raphael's characteristic hurried hand, but Helen could read every word perfectly. It began commonly, talking about work, about Gabriel, about how busy life was. But then the tone changed. Raphael began to use strange phrases, almost as if he were writing in code, afraid that someone else might read it. He spoke of a storm approaching his house, of a garden that was once flowery, but was now full of thorns. He mentioned that the bluebird he loved to sing no longer sang, and that the windows of the house were being closed one by one. Helen frowned, trying to decipher the meaning behind the words. And then she came to the passage that made her heart stop. "Mother, if anything happens to me, promise you will take care of Gabriel. Don't let love be extinguished. From his life, he needs to know that there are people who love him unconditionally, without games, without masks. Guard what I am telling you as if it were gold. There are shadows in my house that I can no longer control. I am afraid of who sleeps beside me, but Gabriel needs light. Be that light for him, Mother, no matter what they say, no matter what they do. Promise." Helen read and reread that passage dozens of times, tears finally falling uncontrollably. Raphael was afraid. Raphael knew something was wrong, and she, his own mother, hadn't realized. She hadn't received that letter in time. Now everything made sense. Her son's change in behavior in the last few months before that terrible day, the way he avoided talking about Patricia, the tired eyes, the sadness he tried to hide behind forced smiles. She clutched the letter to her chest, feeling the weight of the responsibility Raphael had left for her. She couldn't fail him again. She couldn't abandon Gabriel, but how could she reach the boy if Patricia had built an insurmountable wall around him? How could she make a 7-year-old grandson know he wasn't alone when every attempt at approach was brutally cut off? Helen spent the night awake, thinking, planning. She remembered something Raphael had told her years ago, how Gabriel loved to go to the school library during recess. The boy had a favorite book, a children's story called The Wind's Tales, which he borrowed repeatedly. It was about a boy who talked to the wind and discovered that messages could travel through the air to those who needed to hear them. An idea began to form in Helen's mind. If she couldn't speak directly to Gabriel, maybe she could find another way. A discreet way, invisible to Patricia's eyes, but clear to a boy who desperately needed to know he wasn't alone. The next morning, Helen woke with a renewed purpose. She took paper and pen and began to write. It couldn't be an obvious letter. Patricia might discover it. So she wrote as if telling a story. The story of a bird that had been separated from its nest, but never stopped singing, because it knew someone was listening, even from afar. She folded the paper into a small size and placed it inside a simple envelope with nothing written on the outside. Then she got dressed and left the house, walking towards St. Cecilia's Academy. This time she didn't go at entry time. It was 10:30 in the morning. The school was in full swing, but the gates were closed. Helen walked around the block until she found a side entrance where staff usually entered. That's when she saw a middle-aged man wearing a gardener's uniform, watering the plants in the front garden. She recognized him immediately. It was Severus, a man who had worked for Raphael years ago, taking care of the garden at the house where he lived before, marrying Patricia. Helen knew Severus had found a job at the academy after Raphael had dismissed the staff from the old house. Severus also recognized her. His face lit up with a sincere smile, but it soon turned to concern when he noticed Helen's expression. "Mrs. Helen, how are you? It's been a long time since we last saw each other." Helen approached him, checking if there was no one else around. "Severus, I need your help. It's about Gabriel." The gardener put down the hose and paid full attention. He had always been loyal to Raphael, and Helen knew she could trust him. She told him about the estrangement, about the humiliation of the previous day, about the letter she had found. Severus listened with an increasingly grave expression. "I knew something was wrong," he said softly. "Dr. Raphael sought me out a few days before that accident. He told me he needed to change his will, that he no longer trusted certain people. He seemed scared, Mrs. Helen. I had never seen him like that. And then, when everything happened, I tried to talk to the police, but Mrs. Patricia has important contacts. They said it was an accident and that was that. Case closed. Helen felt a chill run down her spine, so it wasn't just paranoia. There was some truth to the suspicions that were beginning to form in her mind. But now was not the time to investigate the past. She needed to focus on the present, on Gabriel. Severus, my grandson, has a favorite book in the school library, The Wind's Tales. Could you put this note inside it? Without anyone seeing? Severus took the envelope and examined it. Yes, I can. The librarian is my friend. Sometimes I help her organize the shelves. But Mrs. Helen, if Mrs. Patricia finds out... He didn't finish the sentence, but both knew what was at stake. Helen held the gardener's hands. Please, Severus, it's the only way my grandson will know he's not alone. The man nodded, putting the envelope in his pocket. Leave it to me, I'll do it today. Helen returned home with a slightly lighter heart. Now it was a matter of waiting and hoping that Gabriel would find the message. But meanwhile, another pair of eyes had begun to pay attention to Gabriel's situation. Julia Smith was 28 years old and had been a Year 1 teacher at St. Cecilia's Academy for only 6 months. She had come from a public school in Croydon, where she had worked for 5 years before getting that position at a prestigious private institution. The move represented a great professional achievement, but Julia carried a deep pain that few knew about. 3 years ago, she had lost custody of her son, Lucas, then just 2 years old. The child's father, an influential lawyer, had used his contacts and resources to convince the judge that Julia was not emotionally or financially able to raise the boy. The truth was that he simply could not accept the separation and decided to punish her in the cruelest possible way, tearing from her the person she loved most. Since then, Julia only saw Lucas every 2 weeks, and each visit was supervised and timed. She watched her son grow from a distance, knowing that other people were making the important decisions in his life. The pain was constant, but Julia had learned to channel it into her work, dedicating herself to her students with an intensity that sometimes worried her colleagues. And it was precisely this sensitivity, sharpened by her own pain, that made Julia notice something wrong with Gabriel Thompson. Since the beginning of the semester, the boy was quiet, withdrawn, different from other children his age. He didn't play during recess, didn't raise his hand to answer questions, didn't interact with his classmates. He sat at the back of the room and seemed to always be somewhere else, lost in thoughts no 7-year-old child should have. Julia began to observe him more closely. During art classes, while other children drew colorful houses, smiling families, and playing dogs, Gabriel drew somber figures, people alone in dark rooms, birds in cages, crying children. One day, during a free writing activity, Gabriel wrote a sentence that made Julia freeze. In shaky letters, with several spelling errors typical of a child learning to write, it read, "I cannot love who I love." Julia kept that paper, just as she began to keep the drawings. She knew they were signs of something bigger, something that needed to be investigated. And then, that Thursday, she witnessed the scene at the school gate. She saw the elderly woman trying to give a lunchbox to the boy. She saw the way Gabriel's mother treated the lady with unnecessary cruelty. She saw, most importantly, the expression of suffering on the boy's face. After everyone had entered, Julia approached Gabriel in the classroom. The boy was sitting at his desk, his eyes red, clearly trying not to cry. Julia knelt beside him, speaking softly so as not to draw the attention of the other students. "Gabriel, is everything all right?" The boy nodded quickly, but without looking at her. Julia didn't insist, but made it clear she was there. "If you want to talk about anything, you can come to me. Sometimes it helps to talk, you know." Gabriel looked at her for the first time, and Julia saw in the boy's eyes the same loneliness she felt when she was away from Lucas. It was a silent recognition, a shared pain that needed no words to be understood. During recess that day, Gabriel did what he always did. He ignored the noise of other children playing in the yard and walked to the library. The room was small but cozy, with dark wooden shelves filled with colorful books and some round tables where students could sit and read. The librarian, Mrs. Marissa, a grey-haired lady with reading, glasses hanging from her neck, greeted Gabriel with a warm smile. "Come to get your favorite book again?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Gabriel nodded shyly. Mrs. Marissa got up from her chair and walked to the children's story shelf. She picked up the copy of The Wind's Tales and handed it to the boy. "You can keep it until tomorrow, but promise you'll take good care of it," Gabriel promised, and went to sit in a quiet corner of the library, under a window through which the soft morning light entered. He opened the book to the first pages, the ones he knew by heart, about the boy who discovered that the wind could carry messages of love to those who needed to hear. And it was then that something fell from between the pages. It was a small white envelope, with nothing written on the outside. Gabriel looked around, making sure no one was paying attention, and opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, and on it, handwritten in neat script, a story. Once upon a time, there was a bird that was separated from its nest. The surrounding trees said it would never sing again, that the wind had carried its song away forever. But the bird knew a secret. It knew that even far away someone still heard its song, someone who loved it more than anything in the world, and so it kept singing every day, hoping that love would reach it through the wind. Because true love cannot be imprisoned by walls or by silences. It always finds a way. Gabriel read and reread those words. His heart beat fast in his chest. He knew who had written it. He could feel his grandmother's love in every word, in every carefully drawn letter. Tears returned to his eyes, but this time they were different. They were not tears of pure sadness, but of something he thought he had lost. They were tears of hope. He folded the paper carefully and put it in his trouser pocket, under his uniform shirt, where no one could see. When he returned to the classroom, Julia noticed that there was something different about the boy. He wasn't smiling, but there was a different light in his eyes, as if a small flame had been lit inside him. In the following days, Helen wrote more notes, always disguised stories, always messages of love hidden in metaphors that only Gabriel could understand. Severus carried out his mission with dedication, placing each envelope inside the boy's favorite book, making sure no one else would see them. And Gabriel kept each message as if they were treasures, hiding them in an old shoebox he kept at the back of his closet in his room, covered by blankets and old toys. But Gabriel didn't just read the messages. He started to respond. On scraps of paper torn from notebooks with his childish and error-filled handwriting, he wrote back. He told his grandmother about his days, about how lonely he felt, about how he was afraid to express any emotion at home because his mother would get angry. He said he missed her, that he wanted to eat her chocolate chip cookies, that he just wanted a hug. Severus, now completely involved in the secret operation, took Gabriel's replies to Helen. With each note she received from her grandson, the old woman cried and laughed at the same time, holding those scraps of paper as if they were made of gold. It was little, very little, but it was all she had, and it was enough to keep them connected, to let Gabriel know that he wasn't really alone. Julia, for her part, continued to observe. She noticed that Gabriel had started taking different books home, always the same copy of The Wind's Tales. She also noticed that the boy, although still quiet and withdrawn, seemed a little less sad. He still drew somber figures, but occasionally a sun appeared in the corner of the page, or a free-flying bird. It was on a Tuesday afternoon during a pedagogical meeting that Julia decided to share her concerns with the Academy Director, Mrs. Carmen Adams. Carmen was a woman in her 50s with short, dark brown dyed hair, always wearing elegant suits. She managed St. Cecilia's Academy with a firm but fair hand and had a reputation for being impartial and professional. Julia brought with her a folder with all the drawings and texts Gabriel had produced in recent months. She showed each one to the director, explaining her concerns. Carmen examined the material carefully, her expression growing increasingly serious. "This is concerning," she admitted, "but we need more than just drawings and isolated phrases. The Thompson family has influence. The boy's mother is one of the main funders of the renovation we are doing in the gymnasium. We cannot make baseless accusations." Julia felt frustration growing within her. She knew that attitude well, that preference for protecting the powerful instead of protecting the vulnerable. I'm not making accusations, Director. I'm just saying that this boy is suffering and we need to investigate. As educators, we have a responsibility. Carmen sighed. I will observe the situation. But I suggest you also be cautious, Julia. I know you have your own personal issues and I don't want that to influence your professional judgment. The phrase was like a slap in Julia's face. She felt her blood boil but managed to maintain her composure. With all due respect, Director, my personal issues have made me more sensitive to the suffering of children, not less. And if you prefer to see that as a problem, then perhaps this is not the right place for me. Carmen seemed surprised by the teacher's firm response. She softened her tone. I didn't mean to offend. I'm just asking for prudence. I will ask the school psychologist to speak with Gabriel. We will conduct a proper assessment. Julia left the director's office knowing she had taken the first official step. But she also knew she needed more. She needed concrete evidence, something that could not be ignored or minimized. And that's when she began to compile her own dossier, documenting every detail, every change in behavior, every sign of Gabriel's emotional distress. Meanwhile, Patricia Morrison was far from foolish. She had noticed subtle changes in her son's behavior. Gabriel seemed less pliable, less willing to simply accept everything she said. He questioned more, albeit timidly. One evening during dinner, something happened that put her on high alert. Gabriel was sitting at the table, picking at his food without much appetite, when he suddenly asked, "Mom, why can't I see Grandma Helen anymore?" Patricia dropped her fork with more force than she intended. "We've talked about this, Gabriel. Your grandmother is not a positive influence for you. She makes you sad, makes you remember bad things. It's better this way. But I miss her. She loves me." Gabriel's tone was firmer than usual, and this deeply annoyed Patricia. She stood up from her chair and walked over to her son, bending down to meet his eyes. "Listen here, Gabriel. I am your mother and I know what's best for you. I don't want to hear anything more about that woman. Is that clear?" Gabriel lowered his eyes, but Patricia saw something in them she didn't like. It was resilience, a spark of resistance that shouldn't be there. That night, after Gabriel went to sleep, Patricia entered her son's room with a mission. She rummaged through his backpack, his closet, his drawers. She needed to know what was making the boy so different, and that's when she found the shoebox at the back of the closet, hidden under old blankets. Inside it, dozens of carefully folded notes. Patricia read each of them, her fury growing with every word. She immediately recognized Helen's handwriting. That woman had found a way to reach Gabriel, to contaminate his mind with her sentimental stories. And worse, Gabriel was responding. There were notes written in the boy's childish hand, declarations of love and longing that Patricia had never received from him. She put all the notes in a plastic bag, planning to burn them later. But before that, she needed to find out how Helen was managing to get those messages to Gabriel. Bammy. Answer came the next day, when she herself took her son to school and discreetly followed him to the library during recess. She saw when Gabriel picked up The Wind's Tales, and how he checked between the pages, looking for something he didn't find that day. Patricia waited for Gabriel to leave the library, and then entered. She approached Mrs. Marissa with a calculated smile. "Good morning. I'm Gabriel Thompson's mother. I'd like to ask a favor. My son has been borrowing this book, The Wind's Tales, very frequently. Could you reserve it just for him and let me know? If anyone tries to touch it—" Mrs. Marissa seemed confused by the strange request, but agreed. Patricia left satisfied, certain that she had cut the connection between Helen and Gabriel. But she didn't stop there. That afternoon she scheduled a meeting with Director Carmen. Sitting in the elegant director's office, Patricia presented her complaints with the soft, controlled voice she knew how to use so well. "Director Carmen, I need to report something that greatly concerns me. My late husband's mother has been trying to contact my son inappropriately, against my express wishes. She appeared at the school gate causing an embarrassing scene, and now I've discovered she's sending him secret messages through school library books. This is unacceptable and needs to be stopped immediately." Carmen frowned. "Messages through books? What do you mean?" Patricia opened her purse and took out some of Helen's notes. She showed them to the director, carefully selecting those that might appear most suspicious out of context. Look, strange stories about birds and nests. Clearly, she's trying to emotionally manipulate a vulnerable child who is still processing the loss of his father. As a psychologist, you must understand how harmful this can be. Carmen examined the notes, her expression growing increasingly serious. This is indeed concerning, but how are these messages reaching your son? That's what I'd like the school to investigate. Someone inside here is helping this woman, and I demand that action be taken. I formally forbid any contact between Helen Thompson and my son on these school premises. If this is not respected, I will have to reconsider Gabriel's enrollment here. The veiled threat did not go unnoticed. Carmen knew how much the school depended on influential families like the Morrisons. I will take the necessary steps. You can rest assured. Patricia left the meeting satisfied, certain that she had protected her territory. But there was something she didn't know. Julia Smith was on the other side of the door, having overheard much of the conversation. The teacher felt her blood boil. That woman was manipulative, controlling, and was clearly trying to isolate her own son even further. That afternoon, after classes, Julia sought out Severus in the garden. She had noticed the closeness between the gardener and Gabriel, the way the man always had a gentle smile for the boy. They talked discreetly near the flower beds, and Severus, after some hesitation, confirmed what Julia already suspected. He was helping Helen communicate with her grandson. "I know it seems wrong," he said, his voice low and worried. "But that lady just wants her grandson to know she still loves him, and the boy needs that." "Anyone with eyes can see he's suffering," Julia agreed. "I'm on your side, and Mrs. Helen's, but we need to be more careful. Gabriel's mother is investigating. She's already discovered the notes in the book." Severus turned pale. "My God, will I lose my job?" Julia touched his arm in a comforting gesture. "I won't let that happen, but we need to change strategy, and I have an idea." In the following days, Julia began to act more boldly. During classes, she started doing activities that allowed students to express their feelings through drawings and words. Gabriel, initially shy, began to participate more. His drawings remained somber, but now they were accompanied by clearer, less metaphorical texts. He wrote about loneliness, about not being able to express love, about being afraid inside his own home. Julia documented everything, building an increasingly robust dossier. And then, 2 weeks after the meeting between Patricia and the director, something happened. That changed everything. The school hired a new psychologist, Dr. Felicity Lane, a 40-year-old woman specializing in child trauma and dysfunctional family dynamics. Felicity was called to conduct an assessment of Gabriel after Director Carmen finally yielded to Julia's insistence. During 3 individual sessions with the boy, Felicity administered projective tests, talked about his routine, his family, his feelings. Gabriel, who rarely opened up to anyone, found in the psychologist a safe and non-judgmental presence. Gradually, he began to speak. He talked about how his mother didn't like him to cry, to show weakness, about how he was afraid to say he loved his grandmother because it made Patricia furious, about how he felt he had to hide parts of himself to be accepted, about the constant nightmares where he was trapped in a room without windows. Felicity, experienced in recognizing signs of parental alienation and excessive emotional control, became deeply concerned. She prepared a detailed technical report documenting symptoms of acute psychological distress, emotional regression, and indications of psychological manipulation. The 10-page document was impossible to ignore. When Carmen received the report, her expression of denial finally broke. She read every word with growing concern, especially the passage where Felicity wrote that the child shows clear signs of living in an emotionally oppressive environment, where the natural expression of affection is repressed and punished, leading to a state of anxiety and possible childhood depression. Immediate intervention and evaluation of family dynamics are recommended. Carmen called Julia for a private meeting. The director was visibly shaken. "You were right," she admitted, holding the report in her hands. "I should have paid more attention from the beginning. Now we have a delicate situation on our hands. If we make a formal complaint, it could turn into a long and painful process. But if we do nothing, we are failing this child." Julia felt a mix of relief and concern. "We need to act, Director. This boy cannot continue like this, and there's more. I know who was helping the grandmother communicate with Gabriel. It was Severus, our gardener. And I've been helping too." Carmen's eyes widened. "You... what?" "I know it may seem inappropriate, but that lady just wants her grandson to know she loves him. And from what I've observed, Gabriel desperately needs that love. His mother is controlling and manipulative. She's isolating her own son." The director remained silent for a long moment, processing everything. Finally, she sighed. "I will need to call an extraordinary meeting of the school board. I will need to call an extraordinary meeting of the school board. But in the meantime, I want you to continue documenting everything. And Julia," she paused, looking into the teacher's eyes, "thank you for not giving up on this boy. I know this must be difficult for you considering your own history." Julia felt her eyes well up, but maintained her composure. "Precisely why I cannot give up. I know exactly what it's like to be separated from someone you love, and I won't allow that to continue happening to Gabriel if I can do something about it." Meanwhile, Helen remained at home, unaware of all the developments taking place at the school. For days, she hadn't been able to send new notes to Gabriel, and this made her anxious. Severus had told her about Patricia's investigation and the prohibition imposed by the school. It seemed all paths were being closed again. It was on a rainy Saturday afternoon that Helen received an unexpected visit. Julia Smith was at her door, holding a wet umbrella and a folder under her arm. The two women looked at each other for an instant, recognizing in each other the same pain, the same determination. "Mrs. Helen, my name is Julia. I'm Gabriel's teacher. May I come in?" Helen opened the door, her heart racing. She prepared coffee while Julia explained everything that was happening, showed Gabriel's drawings and texts, and told her about the psychologist's report. Helen held her grandson's drawings with trembling hands, tears falling silently as she saw his pain expressed in every stroke. "My God," she whispered. "I knew he was suffering, but I didn't imagine it was so serious." Julia held Helen's hands. "That's why I'm here. We are gathering evidence to make a formal complaint, but I need you to tell me everything. About your son, about Patricia, about what really happened." Helen then recounted her story. She spoke about the letter Raphael had left, about the fears he had expressed, about Severus's suspicions. She talked about how Patricia had always been controlling, but that after Raphael passed, this control turned into obsession. And then she revealed something she had never told anyone. 2 weeks before the accident, Raphael came to visit me. He was different, scared. He told me he had discovered things about Patricia, that she wasn't who she claimed to be, that there were lies in her story, in her past. He was consulting a lawyer to revise his will and was considering ending the marriage. But then the accident happened and all those investigations were halted. Julia remained silent, processing the information. "Do you think," she began, but couldn't finish the question. Helen shook her head. "I don't know what to think, but I know my son was afraid, and I know that now his grandson is being manipulated and isolated by the same woman. This I will not allow." The two women talked for hours, planning their next steps. When Julia finally left, it was already night. But both felt they were no longer alone in that battle. The following days were tense. Patricia realized something was happening. People at the school looked at her differently. There were whispers in the corridors. She tried to use her influence to find out what was being plotted, but she hit a wall of silence. Director Carmen herself avoided eye contact with her. It was then that Patricia made a drastic decision. She announced that she would transfer Gabriel to an elite boarding school in Switzerland, where he would receive a top-tier international education. The boy would depart in 3 weeks. When Helen heard the news through Julia, she felt her world collapse. Patricia was taking Gabriel away to where she could never reach him, but then Julia revealed something important. "Mrs. Helen, I found out through the school's lawyer that there's a clause in your son's will. Any significant change in Gabriel's life, including a change of country, needs to be approved by you as well. You are his co-legal guardian, even if Patricia has never respected that. Helen could hardly believe it. Raphael had protected Gabriel even after he was gone. He had ensured she had some legal power even if she had never used it. For the first time in months, Helen felt something akin to hope. The school scheduled the extraordinary board meeting for a Thursday evening. Present were Director Carmen, Dr. Felicity, 3 members of the pedagogical board, and Julia as a witness. Patricia was summoned, but she didn't know exactly why. When she arrived at the meeting room, impeccably dressed and with her controlled smile, Patricia sensed, from the tense atmosphere, that something was wrong. Carmen began the meeting with a firm professional voice. "Mrs. Morrison, thank you for coming. We have called this meeting to discuss serious issues related to the well-being of your son, Gabriel. Dr. Felicity, our psychologist, has issued a concerning report after assessing the boy, and we need to discuss it." Patricia maintained her composure, but her eyes narrowed. "What kind of report?" Felicity opened her folder and began to read excerpts from the document, explaining the symptoms Gabriel presented, the signs of emotional distress, the behavioral regression. Patricia listened with an increasingly indignant expression. "This is absurd," she interrupted. "My son is perfectly fine. He is just a quiet and sensitive child. There's nothing wrong with that." That's when Julia stood up and placed her complete dossier on the table. Drawings, texts, behavioral notes, all organized chronologically. "With all due respect, Mrs. Morrison, but there is something wrong. Gabriel is not well, and the signs are all here." Patricia looked at Julia with contempt. "And who are you to make this kind of judgment? A teacher who has only been here a few months? Everyone knows about your own problematic history. You are projecting your personal frustrations onto my son." The blow was low, but Julia did not back down. "My personal history has given me the sensitivity to recognize when a child is suffering, and Gabriel is clearly suffering from the alienation you are promoting in relation to his own grandmother." Patricia abruptly stood up from her chair. "I will not sit here listening to these ridiculous accusations. My personal life and my decisions as a mother are none of this school's business. And since this is clearly no longer a suitable environment for my son, I confirm his transfer to Switzerland. We will be leaving in 3 weeks." That's when Carmen played her final card. "Actually, Mrs. Morrison, we have discovered that you cannot make this transfer unilaterally. There is a testamentary clause that requires the paternal grandmother's approval for significant changes in Gabriel's life, and she has not given that approval." The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia turned pale, her hands clutching her purse so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice trembling with barely suppressed fury. "This is a conspiracy. You are ganging up against me." "It's not a conspiracy," Carmen replied calmly. "It's an educational institution fulfilling its responsibility to protect the well-being of a student, and based on Dr. Felicity's report and the evidence presented by teacher Julia, we are forwarding this case to the family court." Patricia left the meeting furious but also frightened. For the first time, her absolute control was being questioned. For the first time, there were people willing to confront her. In the following days, she tried to use all the resources she had. She called lawyers, spread rumors about Julia, tried to discredit Felicity's report, but the facts were too solid to be ignored. Meanwhile, Helen finally met Julia, Felicity, and even Director Carmen in person. The 4 women gathered at Helen's house, sharing stories, strategies, and most importantly, the determination to protect Gabriel. Helen showed them the letter Raphael had left, and all were moved to read the prophetic words of the boy's father. It was Felicity who suggested they seek more information about Patricia's past. If Raphael was investigating something, perhaps there were records, documents, something that could be useful. Helen then remembered that Raphael kept a small safe in his old office, which was now locked in the house, where Patricia lived with Gabriel. But Severus, who had previously worked in that house, still had a copy of the key. With the gardener's help, and at a moment when Patricia had gone out with Gabriel for a doctor's appointment, Helen entered her son's old house. Her heart ached as she saw the rooms Raphael had inhabited, the memories echoing in every corner. She went directly to the office and opened the safe. Inside, besides important documents and some jewelry, she found a flash drive labeled Security. At home, Helen connected the flash drive to the computer and discovered something. That would change everything. They were audio files, recordings Raphael had secretly made in the last months of his life. Conversations between him and Patricia, in which she revealed a completely different face from the mask she showed the world. She talked about how she had manipulated Raphael from the beginning of their relationship, about how the marriage had been strategic, about how she had never truly loved him, only his money and status. But the most impactful recording was of an argument between them a few weeks before the accident. Raphael confronted Patricia about lies in her past, about a first marriage she had hidden, about debts she had accumulated and was trying to conceal. Patricia, furious, screamed that he could never leave her, that she would do anything to maintain her position. The conversation ended with Raphael saying he wanted a divorce and would seek shared custody of Gabriel. Helen listened to everything with tears in her eyes. Her son had discovered the truth too late, but he had tried to protect himself, to protect Gabriel. She copied all the files and immediately took them to Julia and Felicity. Together they decided it was time to involve the authorities more directly. Meanwhile, at school, something unexpected was about to happen. St. Cecilia's Academy held a cultural exhibition every year where students presented artistic works, plays, and displays. It was an important event, attended by all families. Patricia, trying to maintain appearances of normalcy, confirmed she would be present. Gabriel, in the days leading up to the event, seemed more anxious than ever. Julia noticed that he spent hours drawing something, but always hid it when someone approached. The day before the cultural exhibition, the boy asked to speak with the teacher privately. "Teacher Julia," he said with a trembling voice, "I want to show everyone how I feel. Can I do that?" Julia knelt in front of him, holding his small hands. "Of course you can, Gabriel. You can express everything you feel, and I'll be here, supporting you." On the night of the cultural exhibition, the school auditorium was packed. Parents, teachers, students all gathered to celebrate the children's creativity. Helen was also there, invited by Julia. She stood at the back of the auditorium, nervous, knowing that Patricia would also be present. When Patricia arrived, impeccable as always, her gaze immediately found Helen. The expression of surprise quickly turned to fury, but she maintained her composure. After all, she was in public. She sat in the front rows, next to other influential mothers, pretending that nothing was wrong. The children's presentation began. There were dances, small plays, poetry recitations. And then it was Gabriel's class's turn. Julia had organized an exhibition where each student would present an artistic work representing their feelings. The children went one by one to the stage, showing colorful drawings of happy families, pets, cheerful landscapes. When Gabriel stepped onto the stage, the silence in the auditorium grew denser. The boy carried a large sheet of paper, but kept it turned away so no one could see. He stood in the center of the stage for a long moment, and Julia, who was on the side helping to organize, saw tears begin to fall from the boy's eyes. Gabriel finally turned the paper. It was an impressive drawing for a 7-year-old. In the center there was a small boy inside a dark cage. Outside the cage, a female figure with wings trying to reach him. At the top of the drawing, written in large, shaky letters, "I cannot love who I love." In the bottom corner, a smaller phrase, "But love always finds a way." The auditorium fell into absolute silence. Patricia was visibly pale, her hands clutching the arms of the chair. Helen, at the back of the room, covered her mouth with her hands, tears falling freely. Gabriel then did something no one expected. He tore his own drawing in half in a dramatic gesture that echoed through the silent auditorium. Pieces of paper fell to the stage floor. And then, for the first time in months, Gabriel spoke loudly, his childish voice trembling but determined. "I drew this because that's how I felt, trapped, alone. But my father taught me something before he left. He wrote in a letter that love cannot be silenced, that if I felt alone, I just had to remember who always embroidered my name on the lunchbox cloth." Gabriel took a small, crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, one of Helen's notes that he had managed to hide from Patricia. "This person knew how to love me even when no one saw. She is my grandmother, Mrs. Helen, and I love her too." The impact of the words was devastating. Some parents began to cry, others murmured among themselves. Julia went onto the stage and hugged Gabriel, who finally broke down in sobs, all the accumulated suffering coming out in waves of tears. Helen rose from the back of the room and began to walk towards the stage, but was intercepted by Severus, who whispered that it would be better to wait. Patricia also stood up, trying to reach Gabriel, but was blocked by Carmen, who had gone onto the stage along with Felicity. The director signaled for the stage curtains to be closed, shielding Gabriel from everyone's gaze. Behind the curtains, while Julia comforted the boy, Carmen made an announcement over the microphone. "Parents and guardians, please remain calm. We will take a short break. Please stay in your seats." Backstage, Gabriel was being comforted by Julia and Felicity. Helen finally managed to reach him, and when her grandson saw his grandmother, he ran into her arms. The embrace between the two was so intense, so full of emotion, that everyone around had to look away, respecting that sacred moment. "You came," Gabriel whispered between sobs. "You really came." "I never left you, my love," Helen replied, kissing the top of her grandson's head. "Never. And I never will." Patricia tried to enter backstage, but was prevented by Carmen and 2 school security guards. The mask of control had finally fallen completely. She screamed, demanded, threatened, but no one listened to her anymore. The truth had been revealed in the purest possible way, through the words of an innocent child. In the following days, everything happened quickly. The case was officially forwarded to the family court. Julia handed over her complete dossier. Felicity presented her updated technical report. Severus gave his testimony about the conversations he had with Raphael before the accident. And Helen handed over the recordings from the flash drive, which revealed Patricia's true nature. A social worker was assigned to assess the situation. She visited both Patricia's and Helen's homes, interviewed Gabriel privately, and spoke with teachers and school staff. The report was clear: Gabriel was living in an emotionally detrimental environment, where the natural expression of affection was repressed, and where he was being deliberately alienated from an important and loving family figure. The judge responsible for the case ruled that Gabriel's custody would be reviewed. Meanwhile, he established a supervised visitation schedule for Helen, who could see her grandson 3 times a week at her own home. Patricia was suspended from the school committee and had to begin mandatory psychological treatment. But the real change happened in Gabriel's heart. For the first time in months, the boy started to smile again. Gradually, he began to open up more, to play with other children, to raise his hand in class. The somber drawings gave way to colorful landscapes, embracing families, free-flying birds. 3 months after the cultural exhibition, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, Helen was sitting on a bench in Regent's Park in Primrose Hill, embroidering Gabriel's name on a new lunchbox cloth. It had become her ritual, embroidering while she waited, and then she heard the voice she loved most in the world. "Grandma!" Gabriel ran to her and threw himself into her arms. The social worker supervising the visit smiled from afar, maintaining a respectful distance. Helen hugged her grandson tightly, feeling his warmth, the smell of child shampoo, life pulsating in that small body. "Look what I brought for you," she said, showing him the lunchbox with his name embroidered on it. "There are chocolate chip cookies inside, the ones you love." Gabriel took the lunchbox and hugged it as if it were the most valuable treasure in the world. "Thank you, Grandma. Thank you for never giving up on me." "I would never give up, my love. Never." Helen held her grandson's face between her hands. "Love is like the wind, remember? It may not be seen, but it always blows where we need it most." "I know," Gabriel whispered, resting his forehead against hers. "And now I can feel that wind again." Julia, who was also in the park watching the visit from a distance, observed the scene with a smile. Her own process to reverse the loss of Lucas's custody was moving forward, inspired by Helen and Gabriel's courage. Sometimes, she thought, the most beautiful stories are those where love finds a way even when all paths seem closed. Months later, on an ordinary Thursday morning, Gabriel entered the school library during recess. He approached the children's story shelf and picked up the copy of The Wind's Tales. He leafed through the pages he knew by heart, remembering all the secret notes he had found there, all the messages of love that had kept him alive in the darkest moments. He then decided to leave his own message for the next reader who needed hope. He took a piece of paper and wrote in his still childish but much firmer handwriting than before, "Love is wind. It may not be seen, but it always blows where we need it most. Never give up on those you love." He placed the note between the pages of the book and returned it to the shelf. He left the library with a smile on his face, knowing that he was finally free to love and be loved without fear, without restrictions, without cages. Helen continued. Helen, embroidering lunchboxes for Gabriel. Patricia began her psychological treatment and gradually started to understand the damage she had caused. Julia regained the right to see Lucas more often and gradually rebuilt her bond with her son. Severus continued to care for the school gardens, always with a gentle smile for the children who passed by. Felicity continued to help other families who needed intervention, and Carmen learned to never again ignore the signs when a child was suffering. And Gabriel, that boy who once felt trapped in an invisible cage, now ran freely through the school corridors, his laughter echoing like music to all who heard it, because in the end love had won, and so had he. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Mrs. Helen, Gabriel and Julia has deeply touched your hearts. This narrative reminds us that true love cannot be imprisoned by walls, silences, or manipulations, and that it is always worth fighting for those we love. To continue experiencing intense emotions like this, we have a special playlist full of other stories that will make you reflect, cry, and believe in the power of family bonds. You can find it by clicking here on the side. If this story of resilience, courage, and unconditional love moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. It helps us immensely to continue bringing narratives that celebrate the strength of true connections. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of human relationships, life's challenges, and the victories we achieve when we don't give up. We await your comments telling us what you thought of Helen and Gabriel's journey and sharing your own experiences about the power of family love. Until the next story.